Did you know that there was a Charles Manson copycat killer that nobody has talked about? Clarence Ray Allen formed a gang of blindly loyal members that would do anything that he asked. They would rob stores to support the gang financially. There was only one rule to become a loyal gang member: no snitching. When people started breaking that rule, Clarence Ray Allen told his gang members to kill everybody, and they listened. This is a story of the Manson copycat killer, Clarence Ray Allen, and the Ray Allen Gang. Blair, Oklahoma is just a small town consisting of 894 people. It is made up of several churches, a small public school, and a few places to grab some food. Born in 1930, this is where Clarence Allen called home. Growing up in a working family, Clarence picked cotton with his mom and dad as a child. To help his family with money, he stopped going to school in the 8th grade. He went straight into the workforce and held jobs as a warehouse manager, a ranch hand, and a night watchman. During his younger years, he took a keen interest on studying Native American culture. He would later associate himself with the Muskegon tribe. By 1968, Clarence had married Helen Seaver, and they both moved to Fresno, California. This is where he started his own security company that actually took off and became very successful. His security company was doing so well that he was able to move his family from a small apartment building to a large ranch and raise show horses. He also owned his own private airplane and had a very large pool in his backyard. Nobody knows exactly why. Some say Clarence had a mental breakdown. Others say he was just bored. But he soon became involved in criminal activity. By the early 70s, Clarence began to attract criminals that he would invite to work for his security company. He went so far as to form a gang and call them the Ray Allen Gang. He made a couple of rules that the gang had to follow. The first and most important rule for all gang members was no snitching. He made it very clear to all of these members that if they were ever caught snitching on any of the other gang members, they would immediately be killed. To make his point clear, he would pull out a newspaper. The headline of the newspaper showed two bodies were found dead in Nevada. Clarence would show this newspaper to the new recruits and tell them this is what happens when you snitch, essentially claiming that he had killed those two people. Clarence and his gang began planning robberies that targeted residential areas as well as local businesses. He was the mastermind behind all of these plans. Clarence would use his experience in the security industry to come up with several elaborate heists. The craziest part about this whole thing was Clarence was very good at making these plans. He was getting a thrill from seeing how far he could take these plans, how elaborate he could make them, and how much money he could make the gang. He was having tremendous success across the area, and the best part was nobody was getting hurt. That's when his elaborate plans started to go too far. By 1974, Clarence was getting a little bored with the same routine. He was pulling off robberies and burglaries all the time, but it just wasn't big enough. He had to go bigger. He started to plan his most elaborate heist yet. He wanted to rob Fran's Market in Fresno. Fran's Market was a busy grocery store in the area. It was owned by Ray and Fran Schletwitz. Clarence was very familiar with this store because he actually knew the owners, Ray and Fran, and became their friend. After several weeks of planning, he had everything in place, and the plan went like this. Roger, Clarence's son, would invite Brian Schletwitz over to go swimming. Brian was Ray and Fran's son. After Brian changed in the bathhouse, he would leave his clothes there. That's when one of the gang members would go in and steal the key to the grocery store. Meanwhile, Rogers' girlfriend, Mary Sue Kitts, would actually become chummy with Brian. They wanted to use her to distract Brian in a couple ways. They wanted to make sure he wouldn't come into the bathhouse and catch them stealing the key. They also wanted to see if he would ask her out on a date that night so they could perform the robbery that night. Their plan worked to perfection. Mary Sue Kitts was flirting with Brian all day. Brian finally asked her out to dinner that night, and she agreed. Later that night, after Brian had closed up Fran's Marketplace, he took Mary Sue Kitts out on that date. Clarence, his son Roger, and two other gang members then broke into the store. They used the key that they took from Brian's clothes earlier that day, unlocking the front door to the store and walking right in. They headed straight for the safe. Unable to get the safe open at the store, they ended up just taking the whole thing home with them. Finally, when they were back at home, they opened the safe and found that there was $500 in cash and over $10,000 in checks. The gang immediately began cashing the checks all around Southern California. On a side note, I'm not exactly sure why Mary Sue Kitts had to go on a date with Brian when the store was closed anyway. The plan was executed to perfection, just like all of the other plans Clarence had come up with. That is, until Mary Sue Kitts had a change of heart and decided she couldn't live with the fact that she had just betrayed someone that she knew. She started to contemplate breaking rule number 1, no snitching. After doing some soul searching, Mary Sue sat Brian down and began to tell him the whole story of what had happened. She told him of the whole plan on how they stole his keys when he was swimming, broke into the market, took the safe, and were now cashing all of the checks around Southern California. She even told Brian about the fake romance between the two of them and that she did it just to help the gang. Brian was hurt and angry to hear this news. He immediately called his so-called friend, Roger, to confront him. Roger, Clarence's son, admitted that everything Mary Sue told him was true and that the gang had robbed his parents' store. After the conversation that he had with Brian, Roger went to his father, threw Mary Sue under the bus, and said Mary Sue shot her mouth off and told Brian the whole story. Brian now knows who robbed the store and is on his way to tell his parents, the owners. It was at that moment that Clarence decided that Mary Sue and Brian had to be taught a lesson, so he paid a visit to Brian's parents, Ray and Fran. Clarence, doing anything that he could to clear his name, began lying to Ray and Fran. He said that he cared for Brian so much that he actually felt he was part of the family, and he would never rob their store. Ray and Fran saw right through Clarence's lies. Clarence then began to get frustrated and hinted that if Ray and Fran decided to do anything, they would get hurt. He also suggested that he would burn their house down if he found out that they were going to the police. To make his message clear, Clarence gave $50 to one of his gang members, Lee Furrow, to drive past the Schletwitz's house and shoot at it. After sorting through the initial chaos, Clarence called a gang meeting. At this meeting, he started to discuss what needed to be done with Mary Sue Kitts. He opened the meeting by telling everyone that Mary Sue Kitts was a snitch. He then held a vote as to what to do with her. The vote was unanimous. Mary Sue had to die. Clarence, being the mastermind behind everything, again came up with a plan to kill Mary Sue Kitts. His plan was to poison one of her drinks at a party. They were going to invite her to a party that was being held at Clarence's girlfriend's house. Once at the party, Lee Furrow, one of the gang members, was going to offer her some pills. These pills would be laced with cyanide. Once she took the pills and was dead, they would all get rid of her body. Lee and Clarence's girlfriend Shirley were not too keen on killing her, however. Lee put up a fight because he didn't want to kill anyone at all, even though he voted for it. Shirley didn't care about killing Mary Sue, she just didn't want it to be in her apartment. Lee was putting up the biggest fight of everyone. He did not want to go through with this. Clarence finally had enough of Lee's insubordination and told him if he didn't kill Mary Sue Kitts, he would be killed himself. Now, fearing for his own life, Lee Furrow agreed to the plan. On the night of the party, Mary Sue had no idea what was actually going to take place that night. Shortly after arriving, Lee and Shirley offered her some pills. Mary Sue actually turned down the pills, saying she didn't usually get high without drinking wine. Unfortunately, Lee and Shirley didn't have any wine at the party. They were thrown off by the rejection and didn't know what to do, so they called Clarence to figure out what the next steps were. Clarence was not happy to receive this phone call. He told them he didn't care how she was killed, but she had to be killed tonight. He also reminded Lee that if Mary Sue left the party that night alive, he would be dead. Lee and Shirley returned to the party and offered Mary Sue some pills again. Again, she turned him down. As the party wore down, Lee found himself alone in a room with Mary Sue. Fearing for his life, but realizing this might be his only chance to get this done, he attacked Mary Sue. Mary Sue was small. She was only 5'1", so Lee quickly gained the upper hand and began choking her. As Lee was choking her, the phone rang. He decided to stop what he was doing and answer the phone. At this time, Mary Sue was almost unconscious, so when Lee let her go, she was gasping for air and was very disoriented. On the other side of the phone was Clarence. He was asking if Lee had gotten the job done yet. Lee told him that he was in the middle of it right now. Clarence said, "Make sure it gets done," then hung up the phone. Lee then turned back to Mary Sue, who was finally coming to, and began choking her again. Lee did what he was told and killed Mary Sue Kitts that night. This was the first time that Clarence finally knew he had full control of his gang members, and now has a very Charles Manson-esque type view of his gang. To strengthen his grasp around his gang, he decided to make every member participate in getting rid of Mary Sue's body. Mary Sue's body was dismembered and dumped in the Frank Kern Canal. They were all accomplices to the murder, and now rule number 1 was set in stone. Snitches would now be sent to prison with the rest of them, if they lived to tell the story. The Ray Allen gang went out of commission for a while to cool down. This cool-off period didn't last long, however, because Clarence began to get bored again. So he decided to recruit 2 new faces to the gang. They were Allen Robinson and Benjamin Meyer. Clarence did what he always did with his new recruits and told them about rule number 1. He also mentioned that he once knew a broad that got mouthy about what was going on with the gang, so he decided to waste her. Clarence then went on to state that she was sleeping with the fishes. This exact quote is from testimony from Benjamin Meyer. After hearing this, Benjamin jokingly asked what he would do if he was in prison. Clarence responded, "You've heard of the long arm of the law before? Don't underestimate the long arm of this Indian. I will reach out and waste you." With his new gang members in tow, Clarence came up with clever ways of robbing local Kmart stores. The Ray Allen gang robbed a local Kmart store on February 10th, 1977. They got away with $16,000. However, Clarence thought Allen Robinson screwed up on that robbery. Clarence thought about killing him, but instead, he just hired a new gang member. New gang member Larry Green was told about rule number 1. 1 month later, in March of 1977, the Ray Allen gang hit another Kmart store. This is where things went south. The new gang member Larry Green screwed up. While holding his shotgun to the head of a Kmart employee, Larry Green thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Turning towards the movement, Larry fired a round and shot an innocent bystander. Police arrived on scene and were able to arrest the 3 gang members: Larry Green, Benjamin Meyer, and their leader, Clarence Ray Allen. Clarence was tried and convicted of robbery, attempted robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon. This incident sparked a downward spiral for the Ray Allen gang. Everyone, including the original gang members, started talking. While their leader was in prison, they saw their way out of their Manson-esque cult. Meanwhile, Lee Furrow was arrested on some drug charges. During his arrest and interrogation, he admitted to killing Mary Sue Kitts. However, he told investigators that he only killed Mary Sue because he feared for his life, and Clarence was the one behind the fear. He told them that Clarence was going to kill him if he didn't kill Mary Sue. This confession led to a first-degree murder charge for Clarence Ray Allen. He was tried and convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lee Furrow pled guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder and spent 5 years in prison. Other witnesses against Clarence during the murder trial were Brian Schletwitz, gang members Carl Mayfield, Benjamin Meyer, and his girlfriend Shirley Dulkel. When a murderer is put on trial and sentenced to life in prison, there are usually overwhelming emotions for the victims' families. A sigh of relief knowing that they can finally start the healing process after losing a loved one. The emotion of finally knowing that justice is being served for the murder of your family member. However, what happens if that gavel slams and your nightmare is just beginning? As Clarence stated before, don't underestimate the long arm of this Indian. I will reach out and waste you. While serving a life sentence in Folsom Prison, Clarence did what he knew best. He began to make friends. He befriended inmates Billy Ray Hamilton and Gary Brady. Both Billy and Gary were set to be paroled shortly after they became friends with Clarence. Like his past ventures, Clarence quickly became their leader. He now formed a new prison gang. He told his new friends that his appeal was coming up soon and he wanted to make sure it was going to go his way. He offered Billy Hamilton $25,000 to kill a few people. He began to devise another cunning plan. Clarence's other son Kenny would provide a vehicle, money, and weapons to Billy. He wanted Billy to kill the owners of Fran's Market, Ray and Fran, as well as their son Brian. They were the main testimony to his murder charge. After Billy was paroled, this plan was sent into motion. Kenny provided him with a sawed-off shotgun, a .32 caliber revolver, and a vehicle. Billy convinced his girlfriend Connie Barbu to come with him. So, Billy and his girlfriend Connie drove to Fran's Market. Entering the market, Billy waved his shotgun in the air and Connie waved her revolver. There were 4 employees in the store, one of them being Brian. Billy led everyone but Brian into a back room. He then returned to Brian alone in the stockroom and shot him in the head, killing him. Billy then went back to the other employees and asked Douglas White where the safe was. Douglas said there was no safe, so Billy shot him in the chest, killing him. Scared and shaking, Josephine Roca was on the floor next to Douglas, who had just been shot. She let out a terrified scream. Billy didn't like this scream, so he turned his shotgun to her and killed her as well. The only remaining employee was Joe Rose. Billy decided to turn the shotgun on him. As he was pointing the shotgun and pulling the trigger, Joe raised his arms up over his head to protect his face. The bullet entered Joe's elbow, ricocheted off his bone, and missed his face. Joe would be the only survivor of this incident. After Billy thought he had killed everyone in the store, him and Connie made a run for it. After running out the front door, they were met with a shotgun blast from a neighbor who heard all of the commotion. His name was Jack Abbott. Jack heard the commotion from across the street, armed himself with a shotgun, and ran over to the store. When he saw Billy and Connie leaving, he fired a round into the air. Billy immediately raised his shotgun to confront Jack. A gunfight broke out. Connie turned around and ran into the ladies' restroom to hide. During the gunfight, Jack was injured and fell to the ground. However, he had enough strength to fire off one more shot towards the back door where Billy was running. This round hit Billy in the foot. Billy was able to limp his way to the getaway vehicle and drive off. When police arrived, they made a sweep of the store and discovered Connie hiding in the girls' bathroom. She was quickly arrested. Billy was now on the run, and his first call was to Clarence's son, Kenny. Billy told Kenny that he needed a new vehicle and to be paid the $25,000 that was now owed to him. He also said he had, quote, lost his kitten, meaning Connie was left behind. Kenny and Billy met and exchanged vehicles. Billy then headed to Modesto, where he met up with his prison mate, Gary Brady. Gary and his wife let Billy stay with them. This is when Billy let it slip that he had just killed 3 people. This was according to Gary's testimony against Billy. Billy asked Gary's wife to write a letter to Clarence requesting the $25,000. Gary's wife did write the letter, however, she included her return address. This ended up being the nail in the coffin for everybody. Meanwhile, Clarence's son Kenny was arrested on a drug charge. While in jail, Kenny was questioned about the Franz Market murders. Realizing that he was in trouble, he confessed to everything and struck a deal to testify against Billy, Connie, and his father Clarence. In exchange for his testimony, he requested that he was able to pick the prison he was going to be staying at, as well as being put in protective custody. He did not want his father to kill him. In June of 1981, Clarence Ray Allen was convicted of 3 counts of murder. Kenny Allen, his son, testified against him. Clarence also took the stand during his trial and denied everything. After 23 days of trial and 58 witnesses, Clarence Ray Allen was convicted of all 3 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death by the jury. Despite several appeal attempts, he was executed on January 17, 2006, at the age of 76. He became the oldest person ever executed in California. During his execution, he wore an eagle feather on his chest and a medicine bag around his neck. He also wore a beaded headband around his head. His last words were, "It's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all. Goodbye." Please like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments if you like the long form content or if you like me just to get down to the brass tacks and make these videos shorter. Bye everybody.